Hi guys, Mr. Simons here. I'm going to go through Ransom, part one, so Achilles part. It's the first 35 or so pages of the novel. And after that, I'm going to draw some comparisons with the Queen film. So let's get started. Just a few notes beforehand. David Malouf, he is regarded as one of Australia's greatest writers. He's written a lot of different things, and in his novel Ransom, he is drawing on Greek mythology. So he's drawing on a whole canon of literature, which is very rich and layered and well known. So he's actually telling a story which has been told countless times before, and in many different ways. Kind of like how Shakespeare's plays are told by many different people, different films, different adaptations. Malouf is doing his rendition of Achilles meeting King Priam to ransom King Priam's son's body, Hector. So it's just prior to Troy falling, and Greek audiences know this film well, but Greek mythology is really embedded into modern literature and films as well. Malouf has chosen a third-person omniscient narration here, which is just important to know because we get a snapshot of what people are thinking, so characters and their thoughts, so the inner monologue. So that omniscient narration is kind of required to explore people's inner thoughts. But the third person also allows him to skip from different characters to different characters and their individual inner monologues, rather than having a character within the novel doing a first-person narration, which would require them to give their take on the whole story. So with that narration, we've got past, present, and future tense. They're all used. So we've got we've got actions taking place in the present, and then we've got flash forwards and flashbacks. So they're used quite a lot. You'll see very obvious in this first chapter, we've got this this timeless feeling, like we're not really sure what's happening when. A little giveaway is past tense verbs and future tense verbs. So just look out for those. But when it's present tense verbs, we know that Achilles is doing that thing at that time. Okay. The last thing here is he uses quite poetic language. Sometimes it's quite a long sentence, and you'll notice this kind of long exploration and description, and then sometimes it's quite short, but the language itself is poetic, and it uses a lot of poetic devices. Okay, we'll go over those more later, but you could describe it as poetic prose or lyrical use of language, or elegiac. Elegiac is kind of mournful description, this longing that Achilles has. You could call it flowery language as well. That's a bit simple, maybe less academic to call it flowery, but it still does the same job. Just to have a look at where Troy sits in relation to the other nations. So we've got the Greek nations on the left, and it's modern-day Turkey on the right, but we've got Troy there. Just to have a look as well. So Troy is up in Ionia there, and we've got, sorry, my circle there is of the Greek nations. That's where the Greek armies come from, and they come from all different parts of Greece there. Right here we've got Achilles' homeland of Phthia, I think you say it. And then we've also got Troy up there. So as Achilles looks across the sea, he's looking back across towards his homeland, across the Aegean Sea. I just want to give a breakdown of characters as well, main characters in this, the whole novel. So that's the city of Troy. We've got the Trojans who are inside the city, and we've got the Greeks on the outside of the city. Okay, so some of the Greeks here, we've got Achilles, Patroclus, and the Myrmidons. We've got Agamemnon and the Mycenaeans. and Agamemnon is Menelaus' brother. We've also got other Greek armies. So on page 7, it kind of names and lists off Greek armies there. So other armies are represented as well. For the Trojans, we've got Hector and the Trojans, so the Trojan army. Hector is one of the generals. He's the son of King Priam, so he's a prince, and he plays a vital role in the story itself. We've got King Priam there and Hecuba. So Priam and Hecuba are married. And we also have Somax. He is the cart driver. He is the everyman. He is the common man of Troy. And so we've got that interesting dynamic between the king requesting something of Somax, and then they share this wonderful common bond of fatherhood. It's really interesting later on in the story. We've also got gods who play a role, and some of these gods aren't necessarily named. Okay, we've got Thetis, the god of water, and Achilles' mother, Ares, and Hermes, and a lot of these are alluded to, or they have other names. So Ares, the god of war, is named, and he's described in a different way. You don't just say, "Oh, Ares has taken possession of Achilles." It's actually quite descriptive and really rich in layered language. The way they describe the gods. And they're almost, they're unannounced. They just appear and they disappear again sometimes. Just a couple of background things on Achilles. We've got this idea of, in the Greek mythology, we've got the elements. So water, earth, wind, and fire make up the world, and things, objects, physical things are a combination of water, earth, wind, and fire. So everything is made of these things, and people and gods and whatnot have their own element, so they have their own main element, and that's important for Achilles because his mother is a god of water and he is a man of earth, so he is mortal. He is bound to earth and he will die, and that's what people do. So this idea of elements is interesting, and they play on this. Malouf plays on that throughout. So there's that connection and tension for Achilles. He's on the shore and he's got that tension. The shoreline is representative of he's longing for his mother. He's longing for comfort in this time when he is frustrated and having this horrible meltdown, essentially. But he's longing for that comfort of mother and that water element that was his, but now he's got that father earth element. So we've got Peleus and Thetis, that's where he came from, and you can see the painting at the bottom right hand corner there. That is a painting of the wedding of Peleus and Thetis. He's regarded as the ultimate fighter, a hero of the Myrmidons. So I just wanted to go over in a nutshell what happens in this chapter. So what actually takes place in this chapter. Later on I'll look at the flashbacks, but right here let's have a look at what happens. So we've got Achilles on the shore reflecting on his past, his royal position, his adopted brother. So he's standing there. Achilles knows he's going to die. In the war, Achilles is insulted by Agamemnon. His prize of war, a slave girl, Briseis, is taken from him. Because of that, because his prize is taken away by Agamemnon, Achilles withdraws his troops from the front. He gets so offended that he says, well, I'm not going to fight and my Myrmidons aren't going to fight either. So the whole of the Greek group of armies, they are unsure now. Their greatest warrior isn't going to fight, and so things don't go very well for them. Patroclus doesn't like Achilles withdrawing his troops like that. Even though he's been insulted, he feels like Achilles should just do the right thing, which is actually fight on the side of the Greeks. They have this bit of an argument, a disagreement, and then Achilles gets mad at Patroclus and then tells him to go to the front if he must. And there's tension between those two brothers. Patroclus tries to trick the Trojans by wearing Achilles' armor. So he wants to inspire the Greek troops. That's why he wears Achilles' armor, which ends up backfiring because Patroclus dies. So Hector kills him, and then Hector's got his armor. Sorry. Hector wears Achilles' armor to insult him, and then Achilles. There's these kind of elongated description of this brief moment where Achilles kills Hector, and they share this moment, this really intimate moment of violence. It's actually really weighty and heavy. It's very poetic language, and it's like time seems to stretch out in this moment of killing and sliding a sword through Hector. So Achilles, here's where it goes really wrong for Achilles. Achilles' men strip Hector of his armor and stab him repeatedly. So Achilles has his men defile the body. Now, the terms of war that the armies decide on before the war happens, so the leaders of armies get together and say, what are the terms here? And they say, if our heroes are slain, then we'll give them back. We'll give them back unmarred or unmarked, and we'll respect your hero and we'll give him back to you. Achilles doesn't do that. He breaks the rules of combat, and he decides to stab Hector's body repeatedly and have his men do that. So not only does he do that, but he gets his chariot and then he wraps a rope around Hector's legs, puts it on the chariot, and drags it behind the chariot. We've got the Trojans on the wall of Troy looking on. They're watching this thing take place, and they're watching Achilles do this horrible, very disrespectful thing. So consumed in his grief and rage, and he's grieving for his brother Patroclus, and he's actually named as brother, an adopted brother in this novel. There are different takes on what that relationship might have been, and different people have speculated on what that relationship is. In Ransom by David Malouf, he's named as the adopted brother. So consumed in his grief and rage, Achilles finds Hector's body restored each day by the gods. So Achilles gets mad each morning and he sees it renewed. His body, he's still dead, but he's just lying and his body's perfectly unscathed. So then he bounds it up again. He ties the legs up and he charges around, does laps and laps and laps, and desecrates the body again. So he's been doing that for about 11 days. There's a few flashbacks in this, so let's just have a look at some of the flashbacks, okay? So we're slipping forward and backward in time. Achilles reflects on Patroclus, and he's reflecting back on when they were boys and when he first meets Patroclus, and then time slows as well when he's killing Hector. So there's this elongated description, but it's all about the warrior and mortality and death, and they've actually reached their fulfillment. So Malouf is kind of elongating those moments to really linger on mortality and what it means to be a hero and what it means to die. So the flashback there of Patroclus meeting for the first time. Patroclus had killed a boy in a game, and so he's sent to live with Achilles, and then he becomes the adopted brother. We've got the flashback also of the Greek generals awarding Achilles a prize of war, the slave girl, Briseis. Agamemnon ends up taking Briseis because his own prize, Chryseis, is ransomed and sent back to Troy. So you can imagine, after being at war for 9 years, there's lots of little, skirmishes and fights, and they try and cut each other's, trade lines off and avenues of bringing troops in and supplies and things, stuff like that. And there's this idea of ransoming as well and bargaining. So Chryseis was ransomed and sent back to Troy. Achilles is offended, so there's a flashback to that moment. So this is part of the flashback as well. Patroclus wearing Achilles' armor and goes into battle. He's killed by Hector. So the present moment that we're talking about is the morning of when when Priam is going to come that day. Okay, so actually Priam's chapter, the next part, they both start in the same way. They're both starting early morning on the same day. There's a flashback of Achilles killing Hector. They're all past tense verbs. You'll have a look on those pages. Achilles begins to drag the body of Hector each day. So I'm going to go through some important quotes. There's quite a few here. So what I'd like you to do is pause the video and then have a go at analysing the quote, but use some of the language that I'm giving you. Okay, use some of the vocabulary within that description that you do. You might need to look some of these pieces of vocab up. Here's this really, this is the very first part of the book. We've got the sea surface bellies and glistens a lustrous silver blue, a membrane stretched to a fine transparency where once, for 9 changes of the moon, he had hung curled in a dream of pre-existence and was rocked and comforted. So in there we've got consonants, we've got this repeated S sound, and we've got imagery happening. You could also look at kinesthesia. We've got this idea of movement within language. So the movement that I see in there, we've got rocked and comforted. We've got the sea surface bellies and glistens. So bellies, even the onomatopoeia there. You know, we've got this this sound of movement of waves. This sound is onomatopoeia, but we've also got consonants that sound, and you could also describe it as kinesthesia in the language, in that we have a sense of movement within the words. Just have a look at the onomatopoeia here. Small waves slither to his sandaled feet and then sluice away with a rattling sound as the smooth stones loosen and go rolling. So he's describing stones on the beach and water coming in and lapping on his feet and going out again. But there's that sound of waves and sound of foam kind of bubbling and rolling and movement through, so water through stones. We've got earth is his element. He's a child of the earth. And then for the whole of his life, he had been drawn in his other nature to his mother's element of water. So we're talking about that tension between earth and water. You could look at that as elegiac, in that it's language that really talks about his loss or longing for something. What is he longing for? To go back to when he was immortal, or is it just the comfort of mother? He could also be searching for catharsis. So catharsis is something that you do in order to heal. So often people find that writing a diary helps them to heal, of their understanding of the day, or they had an argument with a friend. If they write about it, that helps them to understand it. That's cathartic. Here's an interesting one about weightless. So water makes him feel weightless, but also when he's killing Hector, he's described as feeling weightless himself in killing. So is it that that connection to gods, Ares and his mother Thetis, makes him feel weightless and otherworldly and not human? To have weight perhaps is to be human. So you could talk about time in that instance, narrowing or lengthening or extending. There's a few references to bones as well in this chapter. So the ship's hulls are as wide as bones, and then going in a flashback to Patroclus killing the boy, the knock of bone on bone as 2 lives collided and were irrevocably changed. Now, 2 lives colliding there, there's also this, it's a bit ambiguous, because it could be that the boy who died, his life has changed, and then Patroclus has to leave, his life has changed. But we've also got, it's a pivotal moment for Achilles, and his life is changed as well. So it names 2 lives collided, but it's a bit ambiguous as to which 2 lives. And that bones again, so talking about bones. Achilles sees Hector as a sack of bones after he drags it behind. So just references to bones. So here, between their old deep affection for one another, a kind of doubt, of shame even. So we've got this idea of, they were so united, the two adopted brothers were so united, but now this thing, this offense that Achilles feels, and removing his army, there's a doubt in that relationship. So there's a tension between those two, and maybe there's shame involved. And pride and shame are huge things for the Greeks and the Trojans. If all this touches you so deeply, Patroclus, you go and save the Greeks. This man who was half himself. So he talks about Patroclus being half himself and that kinship and fraternal connection. But in that quote about you go and save the Greeks, I wonder if there's a sense of guilt there. So in all of Achilles' rage and anger for Patroclus' death, I wonder if there's a sense of guilt in there as well, because Achilles tells Patroclus to go and agrees to give Patroclus his armour. There's a fight within and without. So this links to what I was just saying there, that confronting the enemy was like trying to deceive or outguess his shadow, and aiming beyond Hector at himself. So he's at war with himself. He's trying to find Hector on the battlefield to kill him, but there's something greater going on, and it's perhaps inside him that he's fighting. And Hector's death, when it came, in his armour, like watching for a second time the dreamlike enchantment of his own. He's seen his own death. He knows that he's going to die. This is something that's foretold, and so in stabbing Hector, who's wearing his own armour, it's like looking at himself and killing himself. See, there's a lot going on. It's not just a simple getting revenge here. There's a lot of layered meaning within that battle scene, which is why Malouf, I think, extends it quite so much. And here it's described as sacred. The moment of killing Hector was a sacred moment. It was almost this, a beautiful moment almost. It was the clear goal of their lives and final achievement of what they were. So actually dying on the battlefield is what they are supposed to do as heroes and warriors. They're fulfilling their purpose. So here's the Ares references. So it's not actually named that Ares is there or Ares takes possession of Achilles, but it's described like this. He felt his soul change colour, himself like a dead man, so he feels like a dead man, like a man obeying the needs of some dark agency. Achilles drags Hector's body, so he's not doing it himself. He's obeying something else. Something else is happening. Then he whispers dark syllables of horse magic to his horses, and he's got these magic horses that the gods gifted to him at his wedding. And then some rough-haired god has darkened his mind. So those are the references to this other, this god who's kind of possessed him. And we've got these, the gods continue to defy him. All this is for you, Patroclus, but it is never enough. That is what torments him. So this is just after he goes round and round and round with Hector's body, and he defiles the body every day. And then he says, all this is for you. Like, the reason why I'm doing this is for you, but it's not enough. And that is what torments him. His actions will not bring him back, cannot make up for what has happened, and it torments him. It's pulling him apart. So he needs something else. After finished dragging Hector again, Achilles is like a man who has climbed out of his grave. So that's the effect that it's having on him. Covered in head to toe in dust, but tired now, his wrists like water. I thought that was interesting, that juxtaposition of earth and water, his wrists being like water. So that tension between earth and water again. here's an interesting description of being drowned in oblivion. So he's tormented by many, many things. So he goes and like jumps on his bed again, his little cot, and he goes straight to sleep after defiling the body again, as though he's drowned in oblivion. It is the earth heaviness in him that he must throw off if he is to be himself again. So he's looking for that other thing, and that's probably why he's down on the shore. He's trying to get rid of that earth self and looking for something else. Here's a really interesting plot point here, right at the end of the chapter. He is waiting for the break, for something to appear that will break the spell that is on him, the self-consuming rage that drives him. And we know that Priam is on his way. Like later on in the day, Priam comes and he offers him the ransom to take the body. And in doing that, that's what Achilles here is looking for. There's something's got to help me with this rage and torment, because what he's currently doing is not fixing anything for himself. Dragging Hector's body is not fixing anything. This is the final line of the chapter there. Day after day he rages, shames himself, calls silently on a spirit that does not answer, and sleeps. Notice the use of verbs there. So day after day, that's the introductory clause there. So this is happening repeatedly. Day after day, and then he rages and shames himself and calls and he sleeps. Okay, so the use of verbs, that listing of verbs, is this. We've got this kind of repetition of these very negative things that he's doing, and the only thing that is brings some relief at the end of that is sleeping every day. Guys, I want to jump into some comparison to the Queen here. Okay, so now we're starting to relate part 1 to the Queen. So I've tried to stick just to part 1 in comparing to the Queen. There's quite a few ideas here. What I'd like you to do again is pause when you come to a good idea and you think, oh, that's interesting, and then try to articulate some of these comparisons yourself and write them in full sentences. Okay, so you are doing the work of comparison and articulating these ideas based on the discussion I'm having, but you're practicing that skill of comparison and articulating. Okay, so in a nutshell, we've got leaders. You know, a big part of both film and text is leadership, receiving criticism. Patroclus disagrees with Achilles and the Greek army, unsure of Achilles' kind of whole demeanour and what he's doing. The Greek army are looking on like, what are you doing, mate? Is this really healthy? You're doing what we should not do. You're breaking the rules of our society. And the Queen is criticised for not showing emotion. So leadership, receiving criticism. The beginnings are interesting here. Ransom begins with Achilles' connection to sea and land. So that's that elements thing. So it's a dual identity. And the Queen begins with a quote from Shakespeare's Henry IV. Uneasy lies the head that wears the crown, and her sitting for her portrait. Sitting for her portrait is quite a regal thing. This is what the royals do. They sit for a portrait. It's not a very kind of human, common person thing to do. So it doesn't quite have the same tension that Achilles is feeling at the start. It has a very elevated feeling that the Queen is doing what she's meant to do. She's not acting as a mother or a grandmother or a real person or a common person. Identity and position. So Achilles' tension between human and the divine, and the Queen's tension between the human grandmother and the divine appointment. So throughout the film, we get the Queen's tension between being a grandmother, and that's actually named in her final tribute to Diana. One of the additions from Tony Blair's cabinet is, can you say as a grandmother, not just as your queen, but as a grandmother? So that's named. But the Queen also is in a position which officially is given to her by God through hereditary. So she's born into it, and God has appointed that she should fulfill that role as queen, which is a similar thing to Achilles. So the divine and the human. The spirituality is an interesting thing, I think, in both texts. So we've got the mythology, the Greek mythology of gods and spirituality being intrinsically linked. And we have fate and what is meant to happen or what should happen, and divine intervention. And so in the Queen, we've got the idea of God, and Blair says, let's leave God out of it. But the Queen is in that position because she's the head of the Anglican Church, and they believe that she's been divinely appointed to be there. So spirituality is an interesting thing, a dynamic between Blair and the Queen, whereas for Ransom, it's intrinsically linked in everything. There's a lot of heat on the Queen for not displaying visible emotion. I prefer to keep my feelings to myself. Duty first, self second. She says that in the last couple of minutes of the film. Whereas for Achilles, rage and violence, displaying grief is common, but crying is not necessarily a manly trait. But Achilles is named as crying a couple of times there. Taking offence at things. So we've got Achilles taking offence. He's subjected to an outrageous affront. And then the Queen, you're confusing humility with humiliation. The Queen says that to Blair, and she's drawing on the idea that she had to be subservient to him in order to get the public back on side. And we've also got Hector wearing Achilles' armour to mock him. So we've got this idea of offending and insult. Public opinion is it very at the crux of the Queen, and there's many newspaper headlines to evidence that. One of them is Palace bends knee to Blair. That's one of the ones at the end. But all throughout the film, we've got these newspaper headings and headlines which are damning of the Queen or criticising or undermining her. For Achilles, when Patroclus wears his armour, he's trying to deceive everyone, and everyone screams out Achilles. And they think they see him on the battlefield, and they scream out his name, and it's described as like a hollow murmur, like a rising wind. So there's this kind of great anticipation that Achilles is on the battlefield again, and that means that the Greeks have a chance now. So some symbolism there. There's quite a few other symbols. So I'm just looking at Ransom in the first part. Okay, so Hector's body has been renewed every day. So I take that as a symbol for the gods mocking Achilles. He cannot progress, just as Priam cannot bury his son. So Hector's body being renewed kind of stops Achilles from moving on. He can't move past the death of Patroclus. You know, he hasn't vented his rage. He's just got this uncontrollable rage, and Hector's body being renewed is simply the gods kind of being against him. The Queen has this Land Rover, and there's these cute little references. So it's an old Land Rover, and Charles at one point says, you know, I thought you were going to get a new one, and she says it's fine. You know, she likes that one. You know, it works perfectly well. It ends up breaking down in the river, and that's where she sees the stag. But it's interesting how she chooses. You know, she says it's fine. I don't need a new one, and perhaps that's symbolic of the Queen not wanting to modernise and not wanting to move forward and progress. She's still stuck with what she's got, and she doesn't want to move forward. Whereas Charles, we see that juxtaposition of Charles and Queen Elizabeth, that Charles is okay with modernising, and he names himself as a modern man, and he tries to identify with Blair, whereas Queen Elizabeth doesn't. Okay, she's really certain about what the monarchy represents and what England is. She doesn't feel the need of modernising or changing protocol. couple more things, guys. Honouring the dead. All this is for you, Patroclus, but it's never enough. So Achilles is trying to honour the dead. And then just the sheer size and scale of Diana's funeral. It's in the last, I think, 10 minutes of the film. They also use the same program as the Queen Mother's funeral plans, and that has a code name of Taybridge. So it's about honouring the dead and how we do that, and whether it's right to do it publicly or privately. We've got grief in the Queen. The stag is killed, and that's where she cries. She cries over this stag, but she sees it as a thing of beauty. Achilles' love of Patroclus, his whole grief is bound up in Patroclus dying. He had wept for Patroclus. To memorialize, how do you make a memory or a lasting memory of those who have fallen? There's the barrow that is made for Patroclus's ashes. A barrow is it's like a grave, but it's more of a mound. So it's like a mound where you have put the body and then you cover it over. We've also got the flower, the funeral, the eulogy, and the Queen's tribute to memorialise. So in both texts we have this love of people. Achilles knows his Myrmidons love him, so the love of the people, the public love him, and he knows his men love him. He has long since won their love, it is unconditional, though he breaks daily every rule they have been taught to live by. He is mad. So they see their leader, they love that guy, they love Achilles, he's amazing, but he's doing some stuff which is not right, and it's against our culture and our way of being. So there's that love of the people that still holds on. The anger, as somebody said earlier, perhaps was just that people are grieving, need to target their anger at somebody. This is what a news commentator says during the broadcast of the Queen. So they acknowledge that perhaps the public are angry because they need to be angry at someone, rather than there's legitimate anger at the Queen. They just wanted to vent anger. And Blair says this: when people come to assess your legacy, they won't remember those few days. You're more respected now than ever. So they both still have the love of their people despite making some mistakes. That's all, guys.